We're going to go ahead.
Yes.
Uh, Today we have a workshop on plagiarism that will be presented by Anthony Bennett. And I'm just going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the Learning Center, and we'll pass it on and move forward. I work with the Learning Center, assisting as the workshop coordinator. And this workshop is sponsored by the Learning Center. We have Andrea Henderson as our director, Charlotte Victorian as the coordinator, and Walter Johnson as the IA. You can visit the Learning Center the Learning Center website by visiting the Merritt College website and then going to Student Services and clicking the Learning Center. I've also added to the chat our website along with our Zoom link. You can access our free tutoring through the Zoom on our website. Our hours are Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. through 6 p.m., Friday, 10 a.m. through 3 p.m. I'll also post that in the chat, our hours, but you can also find them online. Again, please take advantage of these tutoring tools resources that we have for you. We're here for you. We want you to succeed. Also, if you could take the time out to fill out this workshop evaluation, that lets us know what workshops we should have for students. What is it that you want to hear and learn about? We really want to be here for your success. We know it's a really challenging time, and we want to make it as easy as possible for you to move forward and get your degree, your certificates, and so on. So we have math, we have science and English workshops and tutors here for you. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pass this on to Andrea to go ahead and introduce herself. And yep, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. My name is Andrea Henderson, and I have the pleasure of being the director of the Learning Center this semester, while Professor Santana, Isela Santana, is on sabbatical. Today we have a wonderful workshop offered by one of my colleagues in the English department. Professor Anthony Bennett is a veteran educator for over 23 years, and he will present some information that will help us as writers to avoid plagiarism in our writing and research. So I'm going to pass it over to Anthony Bennett.
All right. Thank you, Professor Henderson, and thank you, Ms. Curry, and thank you everybody who's here today and who may be listening and watching the recording. I appreciate you guys' attention and efforts. I also want to thank Michelle St. Germain and Bonnie Brittberger they were actually two of the folks over in childhood development who advocated for this particular workshop. And so I got a lot of good feedback from them about concerns that their students have and things that they've kind of come across over the years as instructors that they felt would be helpful and putting together this workshop and just focusing on the concept of plagiarism. Okay. And as Professor Henderson mentioned, I'm old. No, she said that I'm a veteran teacher. And I'm an online instructor for about 23 years now through Stanford University. And that's my main job. I'm the Writing and Tutoring Center Coordinator for the online high school. I've also worked as an online instructor for different international online programs for Stanford over the last 2 decades, which means that I've seen the development of the internet quite a bit, from its beginning with 2400 baud modems and AOL, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. I don't think any of you are, except for me, thankfully. And thinking about, you guys were not supposed to say anything. Shh. That on the down low. In any event, so what I have seen also, unfortunately, is the rise of plagiarism and how we start to talk about the effects of technology and how there are many cases we view them as being advancements, right? Things that make our lives better, but they also present these sort of moral and ethical challenges to us, as well as with great power comes what? Great responsibility, for those of you who are comic book fans. Yeah, or have you seen the last Spider-Man movie, which is apparently going to run forever? Okay, so I'm going to talk about the topic of plagiarism. I'll give you some information that is sort of broad in nature. We'll talk about a couple of different topics that are related to it. I also have more specific information that's going to be targeted towards folks who are in the sciences, because you guys use a slightly different type of citation system and maybe specific concerns that are going to be of particular use for you in the work that you do in childhood development and also in the allied health programs or in the science programs in general. Okay, so kind of a broad approach, but more narrow as we get towards the end of today's discussion. I'll leave about 5 or 10 minutes towards the end of our conversation today just to take questions if folks have them. So please hold on to those. Okay, I'll try to get to those and make sure that we have that time set aside. And we'll also try to get you out of here within the hour or so. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start, and let's fingers crossed, make sure all the technology works the way it's supposed to be. And we'll go to the shared screen, and I have my plagiarism workshop slideshow set up. Yep, there's the deck. So let's see if we can get to it. There it is. All right, can everybody, I'm seeing shaking heads saying we're good to go. Okay, I'm going to leave the preview on the left-hand side. It's a little bit easier. Can everybody read the text? Is that large enough? I'm seeing some shaking heads. Okay, good enough. All right, so this is our workshop. Our agenda for today is pretty simple. What is plagiarism? We're going to provide you guys with a definition. Why shouldn't I plagiarize? We'll talk about different reasons, maybe some things that are obvious, but some things that aren't so obvious. The idea of how do we avoid plagiarism. We'll be speaking specifically about summaries and paraphrasing, and what do you do in those situations when you're asked to put together those kinds of responses and assignments. We'll talk about the concept of common knowledge. You may have heard this term or phrase used rather when discussing plagiarism or citations, when you should or shouldn't cite. And so we'll get into detail about that because that's kind of a murky area a lot of times for students. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about quotes and citations. I have to say, I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail about that. It's a lot of mechanical discussion, and these are also topics that you can find online and or through the Learning Center. Okay, and so I'll leave that for them and also make some suggestions about where you can get additional sources. And we'll also be touching on the concept of bibliography, or really it should be references or reference lists. I have bibliography listed here, should be reference lists though. And we'll be talking about bibliographies because that's something most of you are familiar with, and we'll just touch on that real quickly. I want to mention here at the beginning that I've got citations in a sense, or reference sources. You'll see a notation on the bottom of the slide. It'll say source, because I'm not going to plagiarize in this particular presentation. So in some cases, I have taken material from different writing and tutoring centers that are online, or different sources that I'm familiar with, either from colleagues of mine who've referenced them or who've created those pieces. But if you see that source, it means that this is something that you can find on that website through that organization. Okay, so if you have questions about that, do reach out to me, let me know. All right, so let's get into discussion and just a bit of definition construction, if you will. All right, so what is plagiarism? Most of us know what plagiarism is, but just in general, it refers to the act of taking someone else's work and presenting it as though it were your own, right? So the sort of stereotypical, generations long example is what we see here, where we have someone looking over someone else's shoulder, right? Copying down their work, or quote unquote stealing, which is essentially what it is. Okay, and so that's a fairly understandable concept, right? We've probably been exposed to it, if we've heard about it, we've talked about it before, but generally it's taking someone else and trying to pass it off as though it's your own work. And as I mentioned before, because of the prevalence of the internet, because we've all kind of been hardwired into the internet at this point, we have access to all the information that exists in the world, literally at your fingertips on a keyboard, right? You can do sort of a virtual, looking over someone's shoulder to see what's available or out there. And I think a lot of times what happens, especially I would say for the last 2 generations of students who've come up with technology, is that this is kind of, the norm, right? I can just look it up. I'll just Google it and I'll get that information, right? It's for everybody, isn't it? Otherwise they wouldn't put it on the internet. Well, not exactly. It's still someone's work, right? And it's still something that was created by an individual or a group. And they need to get credit, right? It's not just because it's out there, it doesn't mean it's free in that sense. Okay, so what are we talking about when we refer to works, plagiarized works? Well, I want to be careful in terms of putting together a good definition for that, because a lot of times we just think about text or a web page, right? But it's more than that. It is certainly written work that could be articles from newspapers, magazines, academic journals. As you guys go further into your academic careers, especially if you're going to graduate school, or even in your junior and senior years, those of you who are going to be transferring into 4-year universities, you'll be doing research. You'll be expected to read journals in your field. You should be probably doing that now if you're serious about your profession and you have a clear sense of what you want to do. or even if you don't, if you want to learn more about what people are dealing with in your discipline, then I certainly suggest you do that. Okay. Also, we refer to, excuse me, textbooks, essays, novels, diaries, etc. Now we're getting to the humanities, right? English, history, philosophy, etc. Okay. Other areas of plagiarize works we don't always think about: computer programs. Yes, you actually can plagiarize code for those of you who do programming or in CSI. All right. And that has happened before. There have been multi-million-dollar lawsuits involving different companies like Microsoft, right? Think about operating systems or in apps. We talk about all these apps that you guys probably have on your phones right now. Somebody had to write the code for that. Somebody had to develop it. And then certain other people will sometimes just quote unquote borrow the code, or they'll insert it into their own apps. It could be for gaming, it could be for finance, but that's still plagiarism. It's still copying or stealing someone else's work. Okay. Music, actually one of my favorites. For those of you who know anything about sampling, right, where you're taking portions of one song and putting into another, this happens quite a bit and has probably become much more prevalent in terms of lawsuits, right? This happened, for those of you know your music history, go back to the 40s and 50s and 60s, for African-American artists. They oftentimes were basically ripped off, to put it bluntly. Their music was stolen from them, and they were, you know, the songs that they wrote and the music, the actual sheet music itself, was taken by others, by typically white producers, and put together and matched with white artists of the time, and they made millions of dollars. And those artists who were the originators, the African-American artists, singers, and groups, didn't make a dime. Okay. And actually go back to the 30s. There's a great film on Netflix. For those of you who have Netflix, check it out. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom is a great story. It talks just about that. Those of you familiar with that particular film. So again, with music, that's something to think about. Maybe I think sometimes we don't really consider, because of just, you know, it's something that we think, oh, it's free, it's on the airways and what have you. There was another famous case more recently involving blurred lines with Robin Thicke and Pharrell, and also the estate and family of Marvin Gaye, who basically said the Blurred Lines single was a ripoff of Marvin Gaye's of his music. Okay, so I think there was a settlement, and if I have the slide here, there we go. Yeah, it was a settlement of $7.3 million. Okay, that's what happened with that particular case of plagiarism. So if you're wondering, does it matter? Well, I don't know. Does $7.3 million matter to you? Yeah, it absolutely does matter. Okay, so again, this is more important and more common, I think, than we tend to think of, and it happens in different ways. And interestingly enough, with this case, it had to do with the chords that Robin Thicke and Pharrell used. If those of you musicians or composers, you know I'm talking about portions of the actual song and not just the lyrics that were at stake in the case. Okay, all right. So just some examples, things to think about. Let's get into questions of why you shouldn't plagiarize. Well, I gave you 73.1 million reasons already, hopefully, right? It does come down to a simple matter of theft, right? You're taking someone else's work. You're taking things that you didn't create, you didn't put together, and passing them off as your own, and in some cases, trying to profit from them. It does stunt your intellectual growth. If all we did was steal other people's ideas, which seems to happen quite a bit on television and movies, we'd never have anything new, right? Think about every film that looks like every other film, right? Or every song, perhaps, that sounds like every other song. So nothing nearly new would come about, and we'd just kind of, you know, get stuck in terms of just the things that we'd have access to. All right. Plagiarism can ruin your academic and professional career. We actually do see this in academics, especially at higher levels, where you have research that's been done by one university or group that replicates research that was done by another and doesn't cite the work of that earlier group, right? And there's large numbers of those kinds of cases which have caused quite a bit of drama in the academic world. We mentioned professional careers, where even in business, I mentioned computer science programming, mentioned entertainment, right? Where if this gets out, you end up with a bad reputation. People don't want to work with you because they don't want you to steal from them, okay? So those, again, are situations, you know, as I said before, that you should think about in terms of why you shouldn't plagiarize. Quite honestly, it's just immoral, right? If you want to be able to thought of as a serious and professional creator of some sort, whatever work you do, you need to try to maintain certain standards. Okay. Avoiding plagiarism. How do we avoid plagiarism? Well, it's not as easy as you might think. Some people just don't steal. Well, how do you keep yourself from being put in that position? Well, first of all, you want to start working on an assignment as soon as you can. In most cases I've seen with students, they end up plagiarizing because they waited till the last minute and they freak out because they think, oh no, I have to turn this assignment in 4 hours. It's 2 a.m. in the morning. What am I going to do? Okay, don't put yourself in that position. You won't get so desperate. Make a list of sources at the start of a project. Going back again to, it's on the internet, it's free, right? No, it's not. Make a list of all the sources that you've been reading or that you've read in the past so that you know in advance, okay, I need to make sure that I reference these sources, both in terms of in-text citations, which we'll talk about, and also maybe a references or a works cited list at the end of an essay or project that you put together, all right? Be familiar with required style of citation. If you're in the humanities, it'll probably be MLA, which is Modern Language Association. If you're in the sciences or math, it's probably APA, American Psychology Association. CE is also sort of a science and math, style of citation, which you may encounter. Your instructors will let you know if that's the case. In most cases, they'll let you know, I want you to write papers in this particular style. They'll have that notation at the beginning of the semester, okay? Avoiding plagiarism as well. Oops, excuse me. What else can we do? Well, make sure you provide your source when including any of the following in your work. An opinion that's not your own. Someone had this opinion. It's not a statement of fact. Okay, you need to cite that. You need to provide a source for it. A theory, a concept that is not your own. Somebody created this idea or this thought process, whatever it is. Guess what? You got to credit that person. And then the obvious one, right? Direct quotes or phrasing of written or text or spoken words. I heard this through a speech. I read this in a book. Those are the obvious ones, right? And also paraphrasing, which we're going to talk about in just a bit. Most of you are in classes where you're being asked to read information and present it back to your instructor to show that you understand it in some way. That does not mean that you simply do a huge cut and paste job into a piece of paper. The book said this. I know, I read the book. Now I want you to tell me that you understand it in some way. So we get into summaries and paraphrasing. When it comes to summaries and paraphrasing, excuse me, as I mentioned before, you're oftentimes going to be required in a course. It could be a set of short answer discussion questions. It could be a longer, set of paragraph responses on a midterm or a final. But in some way, you are trying to define something or provide an understanding of a process, of a concept, whatever it might be. Okay. And those are situations in which you're being asked to summarize or paraphrase an idea or a process that you've read about somewhere. Okay. So what are the things that we can do in terms of avoiding plagiarism and summaries and paraphrasing? Well, when summarizing or paraphrasing, do not copy the original text. That would be a quote, right? Always use your own words. And we're going to get into more detail about what does it mean to use my own words. Include in-text citations for summaries so that the audience knows these are not your ideas. Okay, so you did the summary. It isn't exactly in the same words or the format or the structure of the original. I still need to have that citation at the end that lets the person know these are not my ideas, these are someone else's. That's just a little short parenthetical citation at the end. Easiest thing to do. And we'll get into that as well. When paraphrasing, your writing should be entirely your own and not mimic the diction or structure of the writing of the original author. Okay, what do I mean by diction? The actual words that were being used. Okay. And we're not going to talk about prepositions like of or in or articles like the or an or a. It's more specific to very nouns or specific types of modifiers when you're dealing with diction. Structure would be the actual arrangements of words and phrasing in a sentence. Okay. And it's easier to see than it is to talk about. So we'll get into a little bit of discussion about that, some examples. All right. So what we refer to as partial plagiarism oftentimes happens when students just change one or two words in a sentence. They say, oh, that's not the same sentence. I don't need to quote. I don't need to provide a citation. Oh, yes, it is. It's still the same sentence. Okay. Making minor word changes within a sentence taken from a text is still considered plagiarism. I've heard it described as partial plagiarism. Some people will say that it's fragmented plagiarism. I've heard any number of different terms for it, but it's all dependent. It all comes back to the same idea, right? So for example, using the word superior in place of greater, right? This kind of plagiarism is often referred to as partial plagiarism, which you just mentioned. The ideas are the same. You just happen to change the wording, a single word. That's not good enough. You got to do better than that, okay? Some other concerns that we have here, and this is a specific example, and this was taken from the apa.org site, by the way. All right. So they gave an example where from a textbook, we would have the sentence that you see under the original text, or two sentences. Findings indicate that media content is not uniformly negative. Information about sexual health, risks, and thoughtful decision-making is sometimes present. So that's the original text. The paraphrase text is, according to Ward et al., 2006, media content is not all negative and information is sometimes present concerning sexual health, risks, and thoughtful decision-making. Okay. In this case, if we're looking at and compare the paraphrase text to the original text, excuse me, the question now becomes, did we do enough to change the original so that it doesn't appear to be the same as the original in terms of the diction and the structure? Well, let's take a look. What did we really change here? Okay, we have a color-coded version of the same text. If you notice the wording in red, all right, media content is not uniformly negative. Media content is not all negative. Still pretty similar, right? The structure is the same. We literally have media content as a subject of the clause is not, again, the verbal phrase, all negative or uniformly negative. Same thing. We've already had a breakdown. It's more or less the same. Information is sometimes present. Well, what do we see in the original? Information is sometimes present. We just broke it up with some additional phrasing or clauses and modifiers. Okay, we also put it into one sentence. So that, you know, at first glance, this looks like, well, it's just one sentence versus two. Isn't that enough? No, you still have elements that are the same, right? Both in terms of the word choice. I can literally, as we just did here, point out long phrases that are the same. We also look at the structure. It's still very similar. Okay. This, again, it's easier to see in terms of an example, but to apply it in your own writing is going to be difficult. One of the things I mentioned, I mentioned to students is, if you're going to be if you have to summarize or paraphrase something, take a minute or two after you've finished reading it, close the book, right? Or turn off the computer, do something else for a minute or two. Then go back and answer whatever question it is that you're using for the reading, because more than likely you're not going to remember all the text in the way in which it was arranged, okay? But you probably have a general idea of what the point was, and that's a good way at least to start, all right? So those are just some suggestions, at least in terms of how do you not do that, all right? Next thing we want to cover is, when should I cite? And this is probably one of the most difficult questions that students have to respond to. There's a great chart that I'm going to share with you right now, and this is taken from another one of our sources, the Purdue OWL, the Purdue Online Writing Lab, right? And Professor Henderson shaking her head and smiling. Yeah, it's one of my favorites, right? Been around forever. Okay, I think I used them when I was in graduate school. I'm pretty sure I did now. They have a great chart here. Basically, it's like a little game, right? You start off with, should I cite this? That's the question. You start in red, the top left there, start here. Is the information, data, or opinion your idea? Yes, it is. Okay. Have you published the information before? No, you haven't. You don't need to cite it, right? It's your opinion. You don't cite yourself in most cases. If you follow the yes part, right? If you said, have you published the information before? Then you go to, is the information common knowledge, i.e. do at least 5 credible sources have the info without citation? You say no, or you say yes, right? Then you don't need to cite if it's yes, okay? If you said no, then you're going to be going through the copyright chain here on the right-hand side, which most of you won't have to deal with, because most of you probably, maybe some of you who are, you know, may have been published already. It may be something for you to think about in the future, okay? If we go back to the beginning, we had start here. Is the information, data, or opinion your idea? And you say, no, it isn't. Is the information common knowledge? Do at least 5 credible sources have the information without citation? We end up with yes, it's common knowledge, then you don't cite. If you say no, are you copying the source exactly by putting in your own words sentence by sentence, or reporting a lot of info in a few lines? Copying exactly, then you're going to cite as a quotation. Your own words line by line, cite as a paraphrase. Your own words reporting a lot of information in a few lines, cite as a summary. Okay, and this gets back again to having that single citation at the end of that summary or that paraphrase. Okay, again, this is a lot of information to kind of consume, so just keep in mind as much as you can. Okay, and we'll highlight certain points as we go along. All right. Again, this is a source that you can find online as well if it's something that's useful to you. All right. I want to come back, though, to this point about common knowledge, which is that center box, the one where they start to ask you those questions and thinking about, do I need to cite if it's common knowledge? What does that really mean? Well, for the Purdue OWL, they mentioned Well, i.e., do at least 5 credible sources have the info without citation? I generally don't recommend using that as sort of the criteria, because then that assumes that you know what a credible source is, or is a source credible to you, right? And that becomes problematic as well sometimes. Okay, so I prefer to do this a little bit differently and thinking about common knowledge. All right. Writers do not have to provide citations for common knowledge. However, common knowledge is often harder to find. So what do we mean by common knowledge? Well, common knowledge is often described as knowledge that anyone would possess who has at least a high school education. This is a little bit better of a definition from my perspective, but it's still somewhat problematic because people come out of high school with different kinds or pools of information at time, right? Or maybe you've been out of high school for 10 or 15 or 20 years. Like, are they teaching the same things in high school that they were when I was a kid? You know, or I don't remember a lot of stuff that I knew when I was in high school. So what does that mean? You know, I couldn't tell you all the things that I've forgotten since I've been in high school. It's been 35 years now, whatever it is. So, but we can also ask some other questions, okay? To help you decide whether information can be considered common knowledge, ask yourself, who's my audience? So this is going to become important. This is from the MIT.edu website, by the way. What can I assume they already know? Will I be asked where I obtain my information? All right, so let's talk about a couple of these questions, okay? In terms of thinking about who your audience is, for those of you who are in the sciences, all right, are you writing for an audience in the future, let's say, who are your colleagues, right? Maybe you're a doctor or a nurse, and you're writing about topics related to healthcare that you assume that they know already because what? They learn those same things in your program, right? So you have that same basis of knowledge. Now, if you're writing about that health topic for a general audience, someone in a community college class, right, who's not in the sciences or just a general public, you probably would have to cite that information because it's not assumed that they know that, okay? And that gets us into that second question. What can I assume they already know? Well, it depends on who they are, okay? If I'm writing for the American Medical Journal, which is read by doctors across this country and internationally, would I have to cite as much when it comes to certain basic medical terminology or processes? Probably not, because I can assume that those individuals know that information from, you know, going through their degree program. Same thing if you're an engineer, if you're an educator, or if you're a business person, etc. Okay. The last question, will I be asked where I obtained my information? Many cases, your instructors will tell you, you don't have to cite because I know that we're all dealing with the same book or the same piece, right? Maybe they tell you that. I don't know if they do it or not. That's a possibility, but you should ask them that question, okay? And if you are ever in doubt, and I'll say this repeatedly throughout today's presentation, provide the citation, just provide it. I have yet to see a student fail an assignment because they provided too many citations when they didn't have to. I have seen plenty of students fail, and I have failed a few of my students of my own who didn't provide citations, okay? All right. Common knowledge examples. Again, trying to define what common knowledge is, all right? We talked about the average educated reader, someone with at least a high school diploma, and that doesn't assume that everybody even has that, okay? Things that they wouldn't have to reliably, that they wouldn't have to look up, that they would just know already. Could include information like, well, water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, that's something that most people would know when, or the boiling point of water in Fahrenheit degrees and 100. Barack Obama was the first American of mixed race to be elected president. That might be common knowledge as well. Who's the current president, right? Who was the president before President Biden? That might be considered to be common knowledge, although I would argue some people might not even know that, okay? But it is in general something that you might be expected to know, okay? Other common knowledge examples and concerns that we sometimes have. Information shared by a cultural or national group, such as the names of famous heroes or events in the nation's history that are remembered and celebrated, right? So if I mentioned Martin Luther King Jr., right, whose holiday we just passed, most people would know that in America. If I were in a class, if I had students in my class, which I do, who are from Asia, meaning, you know, from mainland China, Taiwan, or students maybe from South America, which I've had in the past, especially with my online courses, they might not be familiar with who Martin Luther King Jr. is. I would argue probably would. If I mentioned someone like George Washington, would they know who that was, right? So these are individuals, again, who might be familiar to you as a student because you are, you know, you've been educated in that country or you know the cultural history, but maybe not to someone else. So you have to think about your audience. Are you writing for that international audience? Are you writing for people who are more, quote unquote, your peers? Okay. We talked about information shared by members of a certain field. The example here, the fact that the necessary condition for diffraction of radiation of wavelength from a crystalline solid is given by Bragg's law. I don't know what Bragg's law is. I'm not even sure what diffraction of radiation of wavelength is. So I'm not part of that audience, right, that they would be writing for if they were assuming that I would know that. So I would definitely want to have a citation for that. Okay. So again, the point is, what may be common knowledge in one culture, nation, or academic discipline or peer group may not be common knowledge in another. So this gets, as I said before, gets to be both more clear and probably more unclear at the same time, because we're raising and identifying these different situations. Okay. All right. We have 3 examples here, and I'm going to see if I can get some responses in chat for this one. Let me see here. So our examples, and let me move the chat over to the side. A description of the symptoms of Asperger's syndrome would need to be cited for a composition in a general writing class, but probably not need citation for an audience of graduate students in psychology. That's one example. A reference to the practice of fair value accounting would be understood by a group of economists, but would need citation to an audience of non-experts. I would be one of those non-experts. I'm not sure what fair value accounting is. A statement reporting that 24% of children under the age of 18 live in households headed by single mothers would need to be cited. This is information that would not be known to the average reader who would want to know where the figure was obtained, right? And I've actually included that figure in some of my composition courses, because we do look at statistical information related to social mobility, which is a part of that discussion. Okay. Now, moving on to some other, another quiz here, or a quiz rather, I should say. Let's take a look at these 3 statements, and I'm curious to see what people think. Are they common knowledge or not? I have the chat window open. So let's go through the first one. The Big Bang Theory posits that the universe began billions of years ago with an enormous explosion. Is this common knowledge? Let me know, chat group folks. Is this common knowledge, or you think it's not? So you can say, yes, it is common knowledge, or no, it isn't. Greg says yes. Charlotte says no. Sabina says yes. Henderson says no. We got all kinds of responses. Okay. I'm not sure what to think of that we can't agree on this one. All right, we'll see. We'll see. Joan says yes. All right, we'll take a moment. We'll come back to that one. Number 2, the phrase Big Bang was coined by Sir Fred Hoyle, an English astronomer. Hoyle used the term to mock the theory which he disagreed with. Common knowledge, yes or no, it's not common knowledge. Yeah, more no's on this one. Okay, very good, very good. Number 3, according to the Big Bang model, the initial explosion was produced when an infinitely hot, dense center referred to as a singularity began to expand, giving rise to the particles that eventually formed into our universe. Is that common knowledge, yes or no? Is that something you would expect most people to know? Lots of no's. Okay, let's take a look. Same slide, but with some commentary and discussion about whether or not it is or isn't. So statement number 1 was interesting. We had almost half of the group here say yes, half say no. But in fact, it typically is considered to be common knowledge. This is something that generally is taught at the high school level in most science courses. Whether you remember it or not, like I said before, I've forgotten a lot from high school. This is the problem, right? Now, I'm going to skip over 2 for a moment because I want to go to number 3, right, which also focused on the Big Bang model. Okay. Statement number 3 would not need citation to an audience of physics students, but would need citation in a paper for a non-expert audience. It just simply goes into more detail, right, about the Big Bang model that maybe most students would even remember or have been exposed to at the high school level. Okay. So I could see no for that one. Number 2, the phrase Big Bang was coined by Sir Fred Hoyle. This needs a citation. This is kind of like trivia, right? Most of us have no idea who Sir Fred Hoyle was, okay? Even if we do know what the Big Bang Theory was, all right? So again, really kind of depends on which the assumption is about what you would know, right, as an audience member and who you are as a member of the audience. Yeah, makes sense, but not common knowledge to be. Yeah, sometimes they don't even make sense, but apparently, you know, there's things that people should know. Okay. All right, quotes and citations. I did say we would talk a bit about quotes and citations. And again, there's a lot of information out there on the internet. We've mentioned the Purdue OWL website, great source for both MLA and APA citations. So if you want to know how do you cite in different situations, or what kinds of materials should be cited, or how to put together a works cited page or references page, which we'll take a look at later, and also bibliography, definitely check them out. There's lots of other sources. And of course, obviously the Learning Center, okay, where you can get a lot of great in-person advice and instruction. All right. So what is a citation? Well, citation is a means by which you signal to your audience that the information you're providing them has been taken from another source. Remember, we said for paraphrasing and for summarizing, when it's in your own wording, you still need to have some kind of a citation. We'll take a look at one or a couple in a minute. Citations usually include the name of the author and the title of the work. That's more oftentimes the case if you are writing, well, both in MLA and APA. Okay, you at least have the last name of the author. That's the preference in both. They also provide page numbers as well as publication information. That information may actually appear in the sentence level text citation, the in-text citation, and or it may appear in your references or in your works cited page, depending upon which style of writing you're doing. Okay. Citations can take the form of in-text citations literally within the sentence that you're writing, as well as works cited page and bibliographies, as I mentioned earlier. Okay. So what do you need to cite? We've talked about this a little bit before, but it bears repeating, right? All direct quotes, okay? And that's both verbal and written that you're trying to incorporate into your work. Any passages that have been summarized or paraphrased, they need a citation at the end. Keywords or phrases the original author has coined. That may be used again and again in a work, and there's no one specific place you're referencing it, but you do want to make note that it's theirs. Okay. Charts, graph, diagrams, and statistics that are not your own. Remember, we had the household information, right, from the government that we were mentioning. That could have been part of a chart or a graph or a diagram that you reference or include. You still got to cite that. And if you include those charts, graphs, and diagrams, especially, you want to do that. Okay. And we mentioned theories, interpretations, and ideas that are not your own. All right. We again talked about partial quotes or full quote. You need to have quotation marks around the quoted text and provide the proper in-text citations. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit in terms of our discussion. I want to focus primarily upon APA citations because I was told that this workshop was really being solicited by the folks in the health programs and specifically childhood development. Okay, so so the things I'm going to talk about right now, they apply specifically to APA citations, but you can also, there usually are not that many differences when it comes to MLA citations. We can talk about footnoting and those kinds of things, but that's for a workshop for a different time. Okay, so APA Citation Basics. When using APA format, follow the author, date, method of in-text citation. What does that really mean? Well, you'll see what we see on the slide here in the blue parentheses, right? Jones, 1998. That's the last name of our author that we're citing either through a summary or paraphrasing, and that's the year in which the work was written or published, okay? So one complete reference for each source should appear in the reference list at the end of the paper, which we'll talk about a bit. Let's get into some examples though, okay? If you're directly quoting from a work, you'll need to include the author, year, publication, page number for the reference, preceded by the P for a single page and PP for a span of multiple pages. This again is more mechanics with the page number separated by an M dash, which is that really long dash. Okay, so for short quotations, what do we have? Well, if you're going to have a short quotation, usually it fits within a single sentence. That's what we mean by a short quotation. We want to have a signal phrase that includes the author's last name followed by the date of publication parentheses. So we have as our first example, according to Jones, 1998, students often had difficulty using APA style, especially when it was their first time. And then we have the page number reference, the P period 199. Okay, so we have all the elements we talked about wanting to have here. Okay, I want to have some sort of an introductory phrase. We could have wrote Jones writes or notes or something like that, but we decided to go with according to Jones, which is perfectly fine. We have the year after the name Jones in parentheses. We have the quoted text. I know exactly what the text was from the source because I have the quotation marks. Notice the period appears after the end parentheses with the page number 199. You don't need it on the inside of the quote itself after time. That's not needed. You put that afterwards. Okay. Same information, same quote, but set a different structure. Jones, 1998. So we have the last name, we have the year in parentheses found. Students often had difficulty using APA style. There's our full quote. I have both the introductory quotation mark, the end quotation mark. I have the page 199 in parentheses. Then I have a semicolon. What implications does this have for teachers? Okay, so it's a little bit of a more complex structure to the sentence, but it's essentially the same idea. We could have ended it with instead of the semicolon, just had a period, and that would have been fine too, and gotten rid of the rest if you want to use this as an example. Okay, but again, the keys that you take away is here. I want the last name of the author. I want the year of publication set in parentheses. I want the page number if possible. And I say if possible because a lot of your sources these days, they're online. Do they always have page numbers? No. A lot of times you just simply scroll down. And you won't be, there's no pagination as we call it. Okay, but if you do have a page number, please do include it. And usually what I tell my students is if I give you a PDF file that is broken into pages and you don't see the original page number, tell me what the page number was on the actual document. It's a 3-page document, pages 1, 2, 3. That's it. Okay. All right. Short quotations also, if continuing that discussion. If you don't include the author's name in your text of the sentence, maybe you referenced it in the previous sentence. You don't want to keep repeating the name Jones, right? You want to use a pronoun. Well, this is what you do. She stated. Then we have the quote. Students often have difficulty using APA style. Then we have still Jones, because we want to know who this she refers to, right? I want the date and I want the page number, but she did not offer an explanation as to why. And then we have the period at the end. Okay. So again, 2 different ways to do it, actually 3 now. But again, we still need to have what? Jones, we need to have the year, we need to have the page number. Okay. All right, a lot of information to try to process, but hopefully the takeaways, just keep in mind, last name, year, page number. That's all you got to do for now, okay, for these in-text citations. Reference list. All right, I mentioned bibliographies before. Most of you are familiar with bibliographies. You've written them probably since elementary, high school. You may not still remember exactly how to do it, but you've probably done it at least once, all right? So reference lists are similar to bibliographies and works cited pages in MLA formatted papers. Basically what it is, it's a list, right? It's all the resources that you used for this particular paper. So anytime you had a chart or you had a direct quote or a summary or paraphrasing from a source, I need to find that source on this list, okay? Because I want to know where you got that information from. I might want to actually read the original text in some way to confirm what you wrote. And yes, if any of my students out there, Professor Bennett does go back and double check your sources. So don't just list a bunch of nonsense and claim, yeah, I got that from such and such a source. And I go there and I find out it's a page that has nothing to do with what you were citing. Okay. The other point you want to bring this up, and this goes later as you guys progress, and some of you, I know all of you are successful in your academic careers. You move on, and if it takes you into graduate school, you will need to know how to do this. You will be looking at reference lists. You'll be looking at works cited pages on research that other people have done in your field, and you're going to sit there and go, I just want to know what they did and where they got their information so that I don't have to waste my time. Well, I should say waste my time. I don't have to spend as much time doing the same research that they did. It's not cheating. It's just being smart about your time. Okay. And you want to be able, again, do what I do, which is to validate, what it is that they referenced. You also want to see, did someone interpret this source properly, right? Are they representing what was in the original source properly? Or are you sitting there going, this person doesn't know what they're talking about because the original says this and they came up with something else. Kind of like hearing a story secondhand, right, from someone else. Did you know what happened yesterday? Oh, let me tell you, this happened. And you go talk to the person who was involved and they go, that's not what happened. Most of us have been in that situation. This is kind of the same idea, right? You want to make sure, you want to confirm. Okay. So how do you put this list together? Well, as I said before, there's lots of moving parts to these things. So I'm going to try to give you just a quick overview of what it should look like. Okay. And this is from the apa.org website again. And what I did was take a screenshot. They have some great resources over there. It's apa.org. They have samples, research papers, they have sample reference pages. And so what you'll see is something like this. You have a separate page at the end of your document. You've written your essay, right? You go to the brand new page. You put the word references at the top and you center it. And then you have your list of sources. If you've done MLA works cited pages, it looks very similar. I'll point out a few differences though, okay? You can tell how many entries I have here on this page. How many individual sources do I have listed on this page? Can somebody tell me in chat? And how do you know? I should be able to do this real quick. I should get tons of answers already. Sabina, look at you with the big brain. Yes, 6. I have 6 already. Yeah, 6. Okay, the indentation. Very good, Ronique. Thank you, Ms. Curry. Yes, you just look at the indentation. Most entries, this is both for MLA and AP, are going to be set at 1/2 inch inside of the left-hand margin. So let's look at the first one. Avery, comma RJ. That's the first line. I know that the entry goes for 3 lines because the next 2 lines have been indented, and then bam, we go out back to the left-hand margin again with Burke, right? So that's one entry, Avery, and then the line after that and the line after that, which starts 21 to 37, which are page numbers. And then I have a new entry because I shifted back out far to the left. Okay, so we have Avery, Burke, Burke again, Boyson, Boyson, and Boyson. So that's 6 different entries. All right, and you notice some of them have longer longer entries than others because there's more information depending on the type of source you're dealing with, right? Maybe they had a really long title for the article, or the journal title was really long, or the publication information was more detailed. Okay, and again, that kind of information I'm gonna leave for another time. You guys can look it up on your own or go to the apa.org website. They'll tell you what kind of information you need to provide for each of these different sources. All right. Some key differences between MLA, those of you who've done MLA versus APA, look at the first entry, Avery RJ. Anybody know what the R and the J refer to? Is it Ronald? Is it Riley? Is it Ronique, for that matter? Now, I have no idea because APA doesn't require you to include the full first name, right? They'll allow you to get by with initials, okay? We don't do that at MLA. We want to know everything that you can give us in terms of information. So that's one key difference. The use of parentheses in certain situations are going to be different. We don't do that in MLA. They do that here in APA with the year of publication. All right, and there's some small little details as well that you can look into. But again, we could spend a couple of days just talking about all the differences, and I would bore everybody to death. So I'm not going to do that. Okay. All right, last slide for the day. Okay, then we're going to take some questions. Online citation reference list generators. So Professor St. Germain and Ms. Rippenberg just asked me to include this information. I do so hesitantly. Okay, there are a lot of different sources out there that will help you put together individual citations for entries like the ones that we just saw in the reference list, and also for inline in-text citations. Okay, and I have very mixed feelings about these apps, right? And there's a list. This is actually from Purdue University's global page website for citations. Okay, Academic Writer, APA Citation Wizard, BibMe, and I actually have a clickable link. I don't know if you guys click it, but you can click onto that link and it'll take you to that page. These are all apps that allow you to input information, and the app will set up the format for the individual citation. It's not going to write the sentence for you as we were talking about before, but it'll structure the information for you in terms of a reference page. Okay, I'm not the biggest fan of doing this. I've seen students use these and use them really badly, okay, because they don't include the proper information. I feel like you should be able to put together a 5 or 6 entry reference page or works cited page for MLA on your own. Right? And the reason I say that is because I make sure for my students, at least when I give them sources, reading sources, articles, I give them exactly what they need on a cover page for that article. So they'll have the full name of the author. If it's a film clip, I'll give them a director's name, right? The production company, the year was published or produced, etc. So they have all that information. They just need to know how to arrange it right in that list so that's properly done. And we can see if you go back to the reference list or MLA page, the MLA works cited page, there's not that much difference in terms of where how information is organized. It's always last name, first name of the author, if you have it, right? If you don't, then we go to the organization. Then we go to things like the date of publication, so on and so forth. That's pretty standard, regardless of the type of media you're dealing with. And there's always these other sources. You can get the MLA handbook, a printed copy of that. You can get the APA handbook. You can go online and use one of these resources. But if you absolutely have to, and I said I would include this, you can go to one of these sites as well, and they'll provide the information for you. Okay, but be careful, please. Still, it doesn't mean you turn your brain off. You still have to think, because at the end of the day, guess what? Your name goes on that paper. As I tell my students, I'm giving you the grade. Purdue University Global does not care if you pass my class or not. You should. I do. So make sure you do your best. And if you have questions, please ask your instructor. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop talking because I'm losing my voice, and I'm sure most of you have things that you'd like to, hopefully people have questions, okay? And I know this was a lot of information once again. So do folks have questions about anything that we've talked about so far? And I'm going to get out of the share here and go back into the main room. There we go. Okay. All right, so are there questions about just citations? And please don't ask me, is there supposed to be a comma after this? Or where do I put the year number? Because I'm going to refer you to a source and not me. Because to be perfectly honest, I won't even remember all these things. And I've been doing this since the dawn of time, as it were. Okay. We don't have any questions. I always have questions for people. I like to talk.
Question.
Yes, Greg, go for it, Mr. Lowry.
What do you mean by diction and structure
I'll be happy to answer that question again. Diction is the actual wording that you include in your sentence, right? So if you'd refer to corporate America, right? You made some statement about corporate America. You use the term or the phrase or noun phrase corporate America, right? Versus business, okay?
Okay.
Structure means, did you have a subject, a verb, and then the object, right? Or did you have modifiers before the subject? Did you have modifiers before the verb? Did you write a complex sentence in which you started off with a subordinate clause and then you had an independent clause after that, a dependent, independent? I'm getting into way too much grammar, but that's Professor Henderson knows what I'm talking about. Flashback to SF State, where you at, right? So yeah, that's one of those deals where, to simplify it, is think about the example we gave earlier, right? Where I could show subject was here and then the verb and then this, right? In terms of the object, and everything appears in the same order. Or did you switch it up, right? And did you change it?
It was just it was just one thing that I thought about writing down so I could ask later.
I'm glad you did. I appreciate that.
That was it.
Thank you. All right, very good. Great question too, by the way. Okay. Any other questions? Any other questions? And again, I know there's a lot. Ms. Curry.
Hello. So I was wondering about plagiarism generators in a Grammarly, and what are your thoughts about Grammarly? Because I've used Grammarly just to make sure that I didn't plagiarize, because I've been in situations where I've read a ton of articles over time and believe that the information that I want to articulate is common knowledge. And so I may have picked up some diction, or some diction that I guess adapted into my speech about the subject. And so I'll go in and I'll just make sure okay, I don't it sounds really familiar. I just hope I'm not plagiarizing, and I'll use it and then it'll say, no, you're good. How accurate do you feel those things are? And what are your thoughts on using them? And have you used things like Grammarly before to see, just how it works in general?
I've looked at Grammarly just glancingly as a reference source, and I've seen the commercials, right, where they show you on TV, oh, this is fine, or you should change this to this way, right, in terms of the phrasing. And that's what it sounds like you're getting at. My general advice for that would be twofold, right? Number one, especially as you go further into research, right? There's certainly these catchphrases that come up and they're used again and again, kind of like your credentials to be considered a serious academic in your field. You just throw out phrases and people go, oh, well, you have a PhD in such and such, or an MA or MS, whatever it is, right? You just dropping names. That's kind of the comparison I would make. I think in those situations, it's not a problem, as it were, in the sense that it's not specific to a particular work, right? And that's mainly the concern we have, right? Is that you're not taking someone else's writing and trying to pass it off as your own. Okay, I think it's more in line with phrases that we oftentimes talk about at the end of each year that seem to be just used into the ground, right? Let's circle back and talk about that next week. How many of us heard that in a meeting and gone, you gotta be kidding me? And this is 100 times. I've been to 10 meetings today. I've heard it at least 10 times, right? Does that mean that I stole it from somebody? No, it just means that it's been used a lot now. Are you conveying an idea that is very specific to an article by using that phrasing? Then I'd be concerned if you were discussing a resource or a source that you used in your writing and your research. So phrasing in and of itself is innocuous. I mean, it's not that big a deal. But if it is connected back to a specific point or idea that someone else has brought up in the research that you've done, then it becomes problematic. So I'd be more concerned about what it is that you're reading and referencing, right, in your own work, and what you know to be common knowledge in that sense, or commonly referenced, because there are seminal works, right, that we've all had to read once you get through, your 4-year programs or graduate school. You can look at any reader, electronic or otherwise, and the same stories or the same articles will probably appear if you're at Berkeley or at Stanford or you're at CSU, San Francisco State, wherever, right? Because if you're in that field, you should know that, right? It's kind of that sense. That's, again, sort of your credentials are based upon your familiarity with certain works. Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Hope I answered the question. Yeah.
You did. I still was just wondering about your thoughts on the accuracy of plagiarism, I guess, generators or?
I don't know. You know, the idea that some work is going to be able to figure that out for sure, unless they have a data bank. Like at the online high school, and I know at Merit, you know, we have access to Turnitin, right? But Turnitin is based upon there being a database of information or essays that they've accumulated over time, which that's to me is a little bit more reliable. I don't know enough about Grammarly to know what are they basing, you know, their criteria, the algorithm on, right? Where is this you know pool of papers and essays that they've drawn on, and then how reliable are they? I mean, there's so much out there right now that even as an instructor, most of us can tell it's usually a change in the tone of voice, right? When you read someone's right, you just, you know, achieved a PhD in the second sentence, didn't you? That's amazing. Now, and then it drops off to somebody who just graduated from high school. So I know there's something wrong there. That concerns me as an instructor more than they use this phrase that's fairly common, right, in academic journals, but was the idea something that was specific to them or that they didn't cite? I'm more concerned about that, honestly, with all the different things to worry about in the world. So, Sabina, you had a question?
Yeah, I did. So this is going back to the section where you were presenting on summaries and paraphrasing.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, are you recommending that students always maybe use an insight citation when they summarize and they paraphrase?
Yeah. Well, that kind of fits into the other slide in which I mentioned check with your instructor, right? All right. So if we want to be by the book about this, right? Yes, you should. You should always include that citation at the very last sentence. And for folks who are wondering about this, let's say you had a 10-sentence response to a discussion question in which you had to refer to a reading, which most of the times you do, at least one, then you should have that parentheses at the end, right? Noting the last name of the author, right? And that's pretty much it for what we want to do. But this is why I said again, if you and your students know that you're all working with one text, right, or one article, we kind of assume that we all are reading the same text. Now, if you're dealing with 2 or 3 different articles, then maybe we do that. In some cases, it may be that the instructor just wants to get these students in the habit of doing something. And Professor Henderson gone, yeah, and I'm kind of that mind depending upon the semester and my group of students, right? Because that's just more work. Keep, you know, do the little template, copy and paste. Please make sure to include your citation. You know, I just want students to, and this gets into more pedagogy. Those of you who are students in the group, you don't have to listen. But this is more about what do I really want my students to be able to learn? We talk about student learning objectives, right? Do I want to get you into the habit of citing and including quotes? Then yes, I'm going to be a hard you know what about it and tell you, you have to include this and have it in directions. If I know that you already do this normally, and this is kind of, you know, we know better, like, you know, in terms of normally I wouldn't talk this way, but since it's you guys, I'm just going to talk like this versus with my colleagues or someone else in public. You know, you shift and change depending upon the circumstances, right? We're back to audience again. So as the instructor, you need to make the decision about how, you know, disciplined do you want to be about this? And that's neither right or wrong from my perspective, because you know your students, you know what your situation is and what the expectation is going to be. And so if it's just, if you feel like that person needs the reinforcement, then go ahead and do it. And for students out there, if you're not sure, just do it. And or ask the question, right? Don't, because most of us assume whatever the easiest thing to do is. Oh, well, they don't want that. And you find out later, oh, they did want it. Yeah. All right, other questions? No other questions? Okay, we are at the end of the hour and Joan, use it to help students learn. Thank you, Joan, appreciate that, yeah. All right, so I want to thank everybody for coming in today and for putting up with me for the last hour or so. I enjoyed being here, and I hope you guys are doing well during COVID, and you've gotten something useful out of this. I know Ronique and Andrea, thank you so much for having me, and I hope to see you guys in the future, and stay safe and have a good Valentine's Day. I'm gonna hand it back over to our MCs.
Thank you. That was such a great presentation. I've learned a lot. I hope you all did as well. Thank you again for joining us this morning. You can please, if you could, please reference the message I just sent in the chat about the workshop evaluation. This really does help us to create workshops for you and your interests, and to make sure that, you know, you have all the resources you need to succeed. So that's very helpful. It takes a few minutes. If you can't do it this minute, you can copy it and do it later. Also, I posted in the chat our Zoom link to our free tutoring service and our Learning Center hours, which are Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., Friday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m.
One question, sorry.
Sure.
Will this be available for student review?
Yes, this workshop it's going to be it's recorded. So you can access the recording through the Learning Center website. There will be on the sidebar, it'll say past workshops, and there will be recordings there.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for asking that. I always forget to mention that.
So I just want to say, in addition to the hours that Ronique announced, we are open face-to-face as well for students who are on campus. We are open from 9 to 4, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays on the first floor of the library. So you'd have to enter upstairs in the library and come down through the elevator or come down the stairs. But we are available face-to-face, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 9 to 4. And also just wanted to say that I'm with the same note as Anthony Bennett about students learning how to do their references pages on their own. If you must have a template, you can use it, but I'm kind of old school in a sense. I like you to learn it. So in my class, we spend lots of time practicing. So by the time we get to the final draft of your essay, you can show me that you know some of it or all of it. And it's not a perfect tool. I mean, I have a reference book, and it got me from Laney College all the way through grad school. The same reference book. I had to use it every time I had to write a works cited page or a references page. That's just how it works. So thank you so much, Professor Bennett. And we're going to go ahead and stop this recording now.